Welcome back, everybody, to the Catoosa County Government Hour. I'm John Pless, along with Maurice, Bandy, and Bill Clark. We're talking about Catoosa County history, and that conversation naturally has to gravitate toward where we are. This is the old stone church, the old Presbyterian church on Highway 41, right as you go up to Tiger Creek Elementary School. A lot of you have passed by this place probably many times, hundreds of times, thousands of times. Maybe you've never been inside. Maybe you don't know the story. We're going to help whet your appetite for those stories now. So as Bill was mentioning, Maurice, here just a while ago about the county and how it progressed through the years, this church has fulfilled many different roles throughout time as a place of worship and then a place out of necessity. Tell us how this place
Well, you're talking about,
started
of course, as Bill pointed out, it was a Presbyterian church.
Right.
Mainly filled with Scotch-Irish folks. And at the time of the war, if we want to talk about that, and again, this is our county historian here. He knows more about this than I do, but this church was in, I don't know if the right word would be no man's land, but we had the Union Army in Ringo, and we had the Confederate Army in Dalton. And so this area in here where troops from both armies would be going back and forth. But anyway, this church was in the middle, and it was used as a field hospital during the war. And
by both sides?
I think I'm right that it was used by both sides. I know the Union Army used it that way, but am I right, Bill?
The Southern Army used the hospital, but both armies used it. The Northern Army used it as a stable feed trough.
Right. And as we pointed out earlier, the bench that we're sitting on
Yes.
was one of the benches that was taken outside and tilted up on its side and filled with grain, and that's how they fed the horses.
They just filled it up like a trough with the grain.
Right. So, I mean, it's hard to think that, I mean, you think about it, we're sitting on a bench right now that was, what do we say, 170 years old? And you won't find anything like that.
Nothing like this.
In the county.
And how it's built. So what type of wood is it? Tell me the story about the type of wood and the type of nails that are in use here, because they don't make furniture like this anymore.
Well, Bill can tell that story better than I can.
All right. The congregation built three churches. They built one, a log cabin south of here, and then later a frame church a little bit north, and then after they've been here about 15 years, they grew until they built this one. Now the benches are older than the church. The benches came out of the second church. They're made out of chestnut.
Chestnut, which you don't hear about these days growing up.
And the seats are one piece, and the backs are one piece. And there's no circle saw marks on any of them, so they were cut with a straight saw.
Wow.
I'm not sure who had a sawmill around here with a straight saw that could cut chestnut logs.
That big.
For what, 50 benches?
Interesting. So do you suppose that maybe those logs went somewhere far away and were sewn then and then brought back? Or?
No, I think somebody around here had a sawmill that we don't know about.
So there's another gem to discover.
Yeah, with a straight saw that went up and down, but the benches just strong now as they were when they were built, put together with square nails.
Square nails. And they're still holding.
They're
holding us up, so yeah.
As a matter of fact, the whole church is holding together pretty good, considering that it was not built by artisans, it was built by farmers. Local farmers pulled the sandstone off the side of the mountain up here. Another mystery is
how long did that take to do that? Because I'm thinking at that time the technology wasn't around that we had, machinery that could do that easily. I mean, this must have been very time and labor intensive.
The technology was a star drill and 2 half moons. You put a hole in the rock several times. You put 2 half moons in, with a wedge, and you tapped them, and after a while the rock would just fall out.
Huh. That took some time.
That took some time, took some labor, and then how did you get it from off the side of the mountain down here to where you needed it?
Yeah.
So the manufacture, the production of this building was quite interesting.
Big effort.
The
And it's still very solid. I mean, it stands today, and it looks like it could be there for hundreds more years at least.
we put a new roof on it lately,
Okay.
and repaired the wood around the roof. But other than that, it has no major construction problems at all.
And it still stands. And it has air conditioning today, which back then nobody even had any idea what air conditioning might be. Maurice, there's a spot in the back there that has some unique stains or markings.
Yes, as we mentioned,
Tell me the story about that area there, because that seems like a lot of agony and pain was the story back in the day back here.
Sure. As we mentioned, the church was used as a field hospital. And so the corner back there was where the surgeon had his operation set up to basically operate and remove limbs from soldiers who had been shot or injured. And the blood stains are still on the floor. The window would be raised, that back window back there, and there'd be a wagon outside, and they would take those limbs and throw them on the wagon. And so it was, if I'm not mistaken, there were battles that were going on around here, different skirmishes that would have involved soldiers being injured, but this was also a place where they brought injured soldiers from, I guess, from different places too.
From different areas came here, because this was the hospital.
Well, there were, and we can talk about that a little bit, but Catoosa County had a number of hospitals. Prior to the Battle of Chickamauga, when the armies were fighting in Tennessee, there were hospitals here in Catoosa County. There was one at Cherokee Springs, one at Catoosa Springs, one in Ringo, or more than one in Ringo. So it was, as Bill would say, it was a hospital town. That's one of the things that we plan on doing this year. One of the programs we're going to have at one of our meetings is talking about the Civil War hospitals that were here in Catoosa County. And I don't think most people realize that. And I'm learning more myself about this from people like him.
It's interesting that we're talking about hospitals, because right now, here it is in the year 2022, we're talking about building a new hospital in the county to replace, one of the older ones. But it's interesting that you mentioned that this hospitals were a big deal here historically in this county.
They were, and there's some nurses, and there's a book by one of the nurses that was here talking about what happened in the hospital here.
Yeah.
So during the war. So
I would imagine the field of medicine, especially emergency medicine, especially dealing with wartime, really probably advanced here based on just the experience and the knowledge that the nurses and the physicians and the caretakers here probably just learned that basically provided a foundation going further in time about how you care for people who are having emergency trauma, or if they were deathly ill with whatever fever was going around at the time. It was probably a good learning place too for people in medicine.
well, I'm sure that's the case, because there were so many soldiers that were injured that were here and were being treated. So I'm sure that a lot was learned during that process.
Yeah.
Can I comment on that?
Sure. Yeah.
One of the physicians here had a friend in England, and he wrote to him, and his friend told him they had discovered something, that if you took a syringe and fill it full of morphine, it would relieve pain. So he got him a syringe and a pack of morphine, and used it to reduce the pain.
Sure.
So the first parental fix in the United States, as far as we know, was in the hospitals here in Ringo.
Isn't that amazing for pain management? Just so people, if they had a limb that I guess had to be amputated or whatnot, that was it. Because you always hear the old stories about grabbing a bandana or a rag and taking a shot of whiskey and bearing it, but it's there's more to that story, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So, and that dates back here to Catoosa County. Amazing.
Well, and I mentioned that, this church is one of the handful of structures that is pre-Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my wife and I going to New England and going on a tour to some of the towns in New England, and the town square would be filled with buildings that were built in the 1700s and even the 1600s.
Mm-hmm.
Just building after building after building.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you come down here, you won't find that. The Sherman and the Army just destroyed what we had. Of course, we don't have anything that goes back more prior to before the Indian. I mean, this was Indian territory
Sure.
in 1838, wasn't that right?
Yeah.
So, but still, we just don't have a lot of historic structure. We have some, but we do not have a lot here in the county.
Why do you suppose some of these structures were not destroyed by the Union Army? Was it because it was a church, or was it because a hospital? Was it just fate? Was there any rhyme or reason as to who decided which buildings would be destroyed or saved? Or
They wanted to use it.
Well, and I don't think they typically would burn a church. Typically.
That's correct.
They
okay.
typically
So
wouldn't.
churches were kind of sacred.
Yeah, and then they used them for hospitals. I know my my great grandfather's house was used as a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
They lived upstairs, and the downstairs was a hospital.
Yeah.
And so
You don't burn God's house today if you want him to
yeah,
heck you
yeah.
tomorrow to keep you from
That's
getting
right.
your
Sure.
fanny shot off.
They
Yeah.
might have burned it by accident, but not on purpose.
But it was not on purpose. So the churches were a safe haven.
More or less.
Yeah.
More or less.
Yeah.
Now the Presbyterian church, no, the Methodist church in Ringgold was torn down and taken to Chattanooga to build shacks out of for the Union soldiers to use during the winter of 63 and 64.
Yeah.
But it was not burned down. They tore it down because they needed the lumber.
Mm-hmm. Why do you suppose that there wasn't more development around this location, where this was a building that stood and served as a hospital and served as a place of worship? Because a lot of times churches are the cornerstone in many communities, but then you mentioned the railroad and stuff up the road, but why didn't more of a community grow around this church versus it's still pretty much a lot of pasture land and undeveloped land here?
Well, you've heard Bill talk about it, but he's the one that can discuss that about why there wasn't a lot of development in Catoosa County after the war.
Well, the railroad took most of the development to Ringgold.
Okay.
Now, when this church was built, it was pretty well central, because it was central to Cherokee Valley
Mm-hmm.
and Salem Valley
Mhm.
and Keith and Dogwood Valley, and it was on the old Federal Road going from Athens to Nashville,
Mhm.
and it was on the road going to Cross Plains,
Yeah.
which later became. So it was a natural central location at the time.
Yeah.
But what messed all that up was the railroad coming to Ringgold.
The railroad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all the energy and the entrepreneurship and the went to Ringgold.
Well, another issue I thought Bill would bring up is everybody left after the Civil War. I mean, after the Union Army showed up,
Mm-hmm.
everybody left.
That's just because they destroyed so much.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was no food. The Army took, if you had any food, they took it.
Mm-hmm.
And they took the cow, they took the horses, they took whatever. And so there was no means to make another crop. And so, the county was devastated. And how many families did you say there were in the county that are in Ringgold after?
2.
There were 2 families left.
2 families left.
And you got to remember that Ringgold was as big as Chattanooga at the time, right?
At one time.
And what were those 2 families?
One of them was a doctor and his wife working for the Union Army, and the other was a lady by the name of Gordon.
Gordon.
That just didn't run.
They didn't run.
And that's an important point. As the war came to Ringgold, people fled. They fled south, most of them. When the war was over, we were so burnt out up here, they did not come back. So the population after the war was almost completely different from the population before the war.
That's devastating.
Now after the war, the people from the surrounding areas who were not harmed as bad came in, bought the land, and repopulated the county.
And of course, you got to remember there was martial law going on. So even if you did stay, you were operating under martial law. My great grandfather would have been here, and I mentioned the house that they were in was used as a hospital downstairs at the Battle of Ringgold. And he ended up, they used his house as a hospital, and he ended up getting a pass to be able to travel around in Ringgold if he needed to go do something. But eventually, his son left, which would have been I'll have to get my grandfather which one it is, but anyway, and he went to Trenton. Took his family, went to Trenton.
All the way on the other side of the big mountain.
That's right. And stayed there until martial law was over, about 12 years.
Wow.
And then when his father died, he moved back to Ringgold. So it had to be unpleasant. It had to be, if you were trying to stay here.
I can only imagine. Well, this church also serves as now a museum. This is the Historical Society is kind of your focal point in the museum, and we're going to get more into that, into what you'll see here inside the museum in just a moment when we come back. I'm John Pless. Stay with us.